The 541st edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you on a Wednesday morning. A lot of transfer portal stuff to talk about with you once again, but this time it's good news as late last night, Carolina landed their first transfer portal commit of the offseason, and we're here to talk about who that player is, what that player will bring, and what this could mean for the rest of maybe today for Carolina in the portal, and then maybe potentially the rest of the week. Before we get to that, though, we'll start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to legendary coach Dean Smith for that pod thought. That thought is, quote, "If you get the shot, take the shot." You saw a guy at the end of the video intro, Caleb Love, take the shot there to beat Duke and sink Duke in the Final Four. Believe it or not, that happened on this day already 3 years ago. So, the other day we recorded, it was on the 4-year anniversary, whatever, of Roy Williams' retirement. And now we're on the anniversary date of when Caleb Love hit arguably the biggest shot in Carolina basketball history outside of a national title game when he retired Coach K for good and ended Duke's hopes of winning a national championship. Another guy that's going to be taking a lot of shots, and this will be how we'll get into the guy that Carolina landed last night, is Jonathan Powell. And he's the West Virginia transfer that committed to UNC yesterday evening after he had a Zoom conference with the staff. He averaged over 8 points per game, shot 38% from the field, 35% from three in his lone season playing for the Mountaineers. His 35% shooting from behind the arc came on 5.7 attempts. So you're talking about a volume shooter that's going to take and hopefully make a lot of threes. He made 64 threes last year for the Mountaineers. So it's kind of interesting. We were recording yesterday, and it was a lot of negative talk because Carolina, missed on Noah Williamson, the big man from Bucknell, who, is going to Alabama, and they didn't make the Final Five for Malik Reneau, the wing transfer from Indiana. We knew they were hosting Jonathan Powell yesterday. Did not know if you were going to get any news on the day of, because he did have another conference or a visit scheduled to go somewhere else. The dead period gets enacted tonight at midnight, but lo and behold, late last night, there it was, Carolina landing its first commitment of the transfer portal season. And now we can officially say their roster overhaul for 2025-2026 is officially underway.
Yeah, and thank God it is, because Carolina certainly needs a little bit of an overhaul when it comes to that roster. And this is a good starting point. Do I think that this is the headliner of this group? No, I don't think that's going to be the guy that everybody's going to have to hang their hat on. I don't think that he's as bad as some West Virginia people are putting out there either. There were some West Virginia people comparing him to James Okonkwo in terms of the type of impact that he would end up making. There's a guy that played 30 minutes per game this past season, shot 35% from three, which is not bad at all, and 38% overall from the field, which again, not great, but I think, it is pretty solid. And you look at what he is brought here to do. He's brought here to do one thing, and that is to shoot the three ball from the outside. I know that there will be some people that will want to see a more complete game from him. And I think there is potential that he could get there because he was just a true freshman. But I think the one thing that you're needing on this team this offseason, outside of obviously size, are guys that can make shots. And last year, Carolina really struggled down the stretch of the season, or the season that just finished up. They struggled down the stretch of the season to find guys that could consistently shoot the basketball. Jonathan Powell, you're hoping, can become even more consistent than he was this year with that 35% from three. I mean, if he can get into that 38, maybe even 40% range, I mean, you're talking about one of the elite three-point shooters that you could have. He had the most made threes of any true freshman or of any freshman, in the Big 12. I know there were some people circulating the stat that he would led the Big 12 in made three-pointers. That is not the case, but still 64 this season is more than anybody on Carolina's roster outside of RJ Davis. So immediately he becomes the guy that hit the most threes this past season. So I like the pickup. Like I said, when we were talking about him, I think there are some areas that he has to be that he has to improve in, but I do think that this gives Carolina a piece that they sorely needed with some of the struggles that they had this past season.
Yeah, this is a nice way to start what you're bringing in via the transfer portal. What Hubert Davis said at his end of season radio show, there's two things we were going to look for that we're going to bring in from the portal. That's size and shooting. And he fits both of those criterias at 6'6". So you got a guy that's going to be, a lot bigger on the wing. And then you mentioned a guy that, made 64 threes, shot 35% from behind the 3-point line as a freshman. You would imagine, DeVries is a really good head coach, but you would think at a Carolina, you're playing with better players. You're playing in a better system. Maybe you could get more production out of him. That's a lot more efficient. It's also just important to note that right now, man, there's not a lot of shooting on this roster to begin with anyway. RJ Davis is departing. You don't know what Ian Jackson is going to do. We don't know what Cade Tyson is going to do. And, when you look at Cade Tyson individually, the shooting from Belmont never transitioned to the North Carolina stage that we wanted it to, or that we needed it to a year ago. We expect Seth Trimble to be back, but one thing we're going to talk about all summer long if Trimble does return is he has to become a better perimeter shooter. Same thing, we don't know if Drake Powell's coming back, a guy that, shot the three ball well at times at Carolina. But again, consistency is going to be a key factor. So, with this guy, this is a guy that he knows from the moment he arrives to the first day of practice what he's going to be asked to do. And I think that's something that Carolina's got to be a lot more aware of when they bring guys in from the portal. It's felt like in the years where Carolina's been bad, the guys that they brought in from the portal did not know their role all season or late into the year, and Carolina was able to go on a run, i.e. with Brady Manick. This is a guy that I think as much as any transfer that Carolina has brought in since Hubert Davis took over, from the first day when he arrives on campus what he's here to do, which is to run to the 3-point line and shoot the three ball and shoot it very well. Like in transition, this is going to be a guy that you would probably have him run into the corner and get that corner three. Will be a big part of what you do in your secondary break offense as well. So, and I think that matters because with as much as this roster is set to change, having guys that know what their role is going to be from the moment they arrive on campus, I think is going to be a big key to whether Carolina gets off to a much faster start next year in non-conference play.
Yeah, the other thing that I really like about him as well is in transition, you said he'll be a guy that'll just go to the corner and knock down shots. I mean, you look at his film, and he's a guy that, does a pretty good job of running the floor and can get to the basket and score at the rim. Now, it's not something that he's going to do in the half-court setting, but he is a guy that I think will run the floor for you and can get out in transition and finish strong. That's one thing that he does a really good job of. So, I mean, yeah, you combine that with the ability to shoot the three ball. I mean, this is a guy that hit 15 shots this season that were deeper than 25 feet from the outside. So that means that not only is he hitting the perimeter shots, he's hitting some of the more difficult perimeter shots as well. And just watching his highlight tape, I mean, you see that, there are a lot of shots that are guarded. He's still able to knock them down pretty confidently, really good as a catch and shoot type of guy. So you're right. I think knowing his role on this team is going to be important for him. I think he knows what he's coming in here to do. You're coming in here to knock down threes, run the floor really well, and we're just looking for the effort on the offense or on the defensive end of the floor. In terms of, the analytics on how he is as a defender, I mean, it's not bad. It's not great by any stretch either, but I mean, a 104.5, that's one of the lowest defensive ratings that we've seen, which is a good thing. The lower your defensive rating, the better defender you are. That, and take it for what it's worth, that's coming from Sports Reference. That's still pretty solid. That shows you that he's a decent defender. So, I mean, Carolina, that was one thing about Darian DeVries. You had to defend to be a part of his team. So I think Carolina is getting a really solid overall player. Is it a guy that's really going to blow you away? Is he a guy that's going to turn into someone that can score at all three levels? He's going to be someone that leads the team in scoring? No, I don't think that's what he's going to be. But he fills a specific role for Carolina. And here's the thing. In an ideal world, Drake Powell's coming back. This is a guy that's probably coming off the bench for you. And if this is the guy that's coming off the bench for you, you have to really, really like that. But the thing is, he is also capable of starting for a power conference team and playing a significant amount of minutes like he did this season. So I think Carolina wants to create that flexibility because of what we talked about yesterday. We don't know what's happening with Drake Powell. We don't know what's happening with Ian Jackson. Right now, those decisions are apparently still being made. So Carolina couldn't wait much longer. This is the perfect type of guy where I feel like if he has to start, then he's going to be perfectly fine. He'll be able to handle that. Maybe he's not the greatest player, but he's certainly someone that can contribute. If he's a guy that has to come off the bench, I feel like he'll be able to thrive in that role as well.
Yeah, that's what I was wanting to transition to next was expectations, because right now he's the first guy that Carolina has brought in, from the portal. And so with that, there's going to be, everyone's going to be, I guess, the most excited about him, kind of like how K. Tyson was, or maybe they overrate and put too much on his shoulders. You're talking about a guy that played in 32 games a year ago at the power conference level, started 23 games, and averaged 30 minutes per game against power conference competition. So this is not a guy that's having to make the transition from the mid-major level up to the power conference level at a school like Carolina that's going to play, a difficult non-conference schedule, and then, of course, a 20-game ACC gauntlet. So for expectations just on the surface right now, what should Carolina fans expect from him? Because I think you love the fact that he has starting experience, but I think if we're looking at a best case scenario, the best case would be that Drake Powell comes back. I think Caleb Wilson's all but assured to be a starter once he arrives on campus via the summer. I think the best role for him and the best expectation for him is to be a spark plug that comes off the bench and scores, kind of what K. Tyson was supposed to be for Carolina this past season, but just never, that never came to fruition. This could be a guy that could play, 24 plus minutes a night coming off the bench, but be a guy that scores the ball at a high volume for Carolina with his ability to shoot the three ball so well.
Yeah, I mean, the expectations, I think, But I'm not saying that they got to be relatively low. But again, you can't be expecting this guy to be a superstar. If you're expecting him to come in here, be, one of the best 3-point shooters in the country, then I think you might be expecting a little too much. Remember, we sort of expected that with Cade Tyson last year, and that was a dude that was coming off a season where he shot 46% from deep. We thought shooting would travel. I do think the fact that he did play in a power conference allows you to be a little more aggressive in terms of what expectations you're putting on him. I think you're expecting a guy that is going to put together starter-like numbers. You're expecting a guy that is going to be able to shoot maybe somewhere in that 37, 38% range from beyond the arc for you. And I really think you're expecting to see a guy that can defend at a pretty decent rate. You're hoping that this is a guy that is just part of the rotation, that becomes, a guy that you can rely on from deep. I think that's what you're really hoping for. You can't set the expectations at this is going to be an all-conference type of player. That's not the guy that you're bringing in here. Now, some of the other guys that we're going to talk about, maybe you could have that conversation. But I look at this guy as just a piece that, is very specified in what he's here to do. And I think as long as he comes in and becomes that consistent 3-point shooter for you, that's a threat every time he's on the court. That's really what your expectations should be for him and really for the team. Like, to me, this doesn't move the needle enough for me to say that this is a team that now should be comfortably in the NCAA tournament. I think this is just a guy that should be your second or third, I would hope third piece in this transfer portal cycle that you're bringing in, and that he becomes sort of a guy that people look at and say, oh, that's a nice contributor off the bench, but not necessarily a headliner.
And I think it's important to point out that if he's a key piece coming off the bench, it doesn't mean that he's not good enough to start at Carolina. It means that Carolina finally has what they've lacked under Hubert Davis. When has this roster actually had legitimate depth? Like, we've looked at these rosters in the preseason, and we thought there was depth there that existed where Carolina could play 8, 9, 10 guys consistently into January, February, maybe get scaled back a little bit into March. That hasn't been the case in any of his, 4 years. Like, usually best case scenario, last year in terms of being the year with Baycott, Ryan, Ingram, Davis and the crew, that was as deep as Carolina was, and they were still basically playing 7 dudes in March. Mm-hmm. So, like, if this guy is coming off the bench, it probably tells you that Carolina got pieces back that they needed back, or that they, in terms of Drake Powell didn't leave, Seth Trimble stayed, maybe an Ian Jackson also winds up back in Chapel Hill, or maybe you bring in another starting level transfer for that's currently in the portal right now. But you've got to start having guys that can come off the bench and make a difference. And that's been something that Carolina has lacked. And so I think it's important to point out, because fans look at, well, are you recruiting starters? Are you recruiting guys that are going to come into your program and start right away? And some years you need to do that. I think this year in the backcourt specifically, yes, you'd love to add a starter or two. But the schools that really, knock it out of the park in the portal, they're recruiting difference makers, whether they're starters or they're guys that come off the bench. And so as long as this guy is a bona fide part of your rotation, a part of your core 8 to hopefully 9 guys you're playing, all season long, then that would be something that would say, okay, this is someone that Hubert Davis identified and hit on. And so we'll have to wait and see how this roster shakes out. I think we're comfortable if he ends up having to start, but if he's not a starter, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And that might be the way some fans kind of approach that, because of the way that they just feel about the way Carolina has performed or underperformed so far in the transfer portal. Let's move on. A lot more transfer portal news we have to get to. This also kind of happened right before, right after, or kind of during the initial announcement of Powell coming to Carolina. Carolina had Nick Boyd, the San Diego State transfer. He visited over the weekend But he's now been crystal balled to go to Wisconsin. Of course, that's not the end-all, be-all, but typically when those things happen, guys like Travis Branham, those guys are usually not wrong. And so, this is a guy that we had to talk about over the weekend. Once we learned that not only was Carolina in contact with him, but hosting him, but it appears that, he is not going to be coming to Carolina, and he'll be going to Chapel Hill. Just your initial thoughts on that being a potential backcourt member that Carolina, not only got involved with, but hosted, but appears to be destined to play college basketball elsewhere other than UNC next year.
Well, you hope that what it means is that Carolina is going after a bigger name. I mean, there are guys that did enter the transfer portal here within the last couple of days that might be better fits for Carolina, that have played at the power conference level, and you're hoping maybe that's the reason why Carolina is not going to be the pick here. I mean, Wisconsin, credit to them, man. They've clearly showed him what they needed to show him. But I'm hoping that for Carolina, this means that they're going after a guy like Trey Donaldson. Maybe they're in the market for a guy like Nigel Pack, who has an extra year of eligibility. Those are the types of guys that you're hoping now, because they miss on a guy like Boyd, that they can potentially go after. I know people are going to be angry about this, but again, this was another guy that when Carolina first jumped in on him, people were complaining that this was the best that Carolina was going to be able to get. And so now Carolina is going to miss on him, and it could potentially be because they like somebody else that entered the transfer portal yesterday or the day before. And people are still going to overreact and say this shows that we've lost our touch or whatever. To me, I mean, I think he's a really good player, but is he a guy that I'm devastated that Carolina is missing out on? No. Now, come to me within a week, and if Carolina hasn't gotten involved with any of the other bigger names, okay, then we can start to have the conversation of, did Carolina really make the right decision? Is this another Danny Wolf type move where Carolina ends up saying, nah, we're good, we're looking for a bigger name, and he ends up going somewhere else and ends up thriving? That could certainly be something that happens, but I think that Carolina, they still got Nick Dorn that they're in on. I believe that he's a guy that probably can play that one spot and score the ball for you. I'd much rather prefer him to play the two, because I think he's a better catch and shoot type player than he is a guy that creates on his own. But I do think that it's possible that could be the direction that they're going in. I'm not really that panicked, though, by it right now. But again, come back to me in a week and let's see where Carolina's at, because there are some big guys that they can go after, and I think that they should go after. Now the question becomes, will they actually put in the work on some of these guys and be willing to spend the money for some of these guys in order to get them on campus?
I think track record helps Wisconsin in this regard. They brought in John Tonje, a guy who went from the Mountain West to becoming the impact player he was this past year for the Badgers. I think that helps them, where Nick Boyd could look at Carolina and say, y'all have really struggled with guys that have come from my level of college basketball, and they haven't transitioned very well, to the ACC level. And I mean, that could be that's me more speculating, more thinking out loud. Mm-hmm. But I do think that is something that is hurting Carolina right now in the portal, is that there is the notion that this program has struggled to develop mid-major level talent. And, even the top tier programs are in the schools that have NIL money at their disposal. Look at what Louisville going to the mid-major route. Same thing with Baylor. Those schools haven't had the same issues that Carolina has, bringing these guys up a level in competition and still getting the same quality, the same level of production that they got at the mid-major level. You mentioned Nick Dorn. According to Inside Carolina, he was on campus yesterday. Of course, he's a transfer from Elon who performed really well against Carolina all the way back in the season opening win for the Heels. But in a game that Elon led with less than 7 minutes to go in regulation, the big news item is the fact that Carolina is set to host, and he's on campus right now. Per Inside Carolina, arrived in Chapel Hill around 1 a.m. And that's the Arizona big man, Henry Vesser, who Carolina is getting involved with. and is now, having him on campus. You're talking about a 7-foot big man from Arizona, a guy that played a big part of what that team was able to do, down the stretch of the regular season into the NCAA tournament. He's an overseas big man, so which makes a lot of sense because Tommy Lloyd, former assistant under Mark Few, they recruit overseas as well as anybody. He's taken that with him now down to Arizona. This is a guy that, Carolina is going all out on. They have until 11:59 to show him everything they can show him because the Final Four dead period begins tonight at midnight. But this is going to be one that Carolina is going to be, I think, full court press, any sort of all-out mantra you want to talk about. This guy's going to get it. They didn't, Noah Williamson, I think, was maybe a guy they just checked in on, wanted to see what the interest was. He ends up going to Bama. A lot of concerns about him being able to produce at the ACC level after, doing what he did down at the Patriot League. Vesser, a guy that, is coming from a power program, a program that competes and play at the highest level. You don't think that he would have a hard time transitioning to the way Carolina wants to do things. So when you look at his visit today, how much pressure, I think, are you willing to say, is there on Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner, to all but ensure that when his visit comes to a conclusion, it ends with him committing to UNC and not going somewhere else?
Yeah, it's pretty crucial because Carolina really needs a big man of this type of caliber. Now, the thing about him that people have to realize is he was never a full-time starter for Arizona. He played 20 minutes off the bench this year. So you're hoping that he can grow into a guy that could potentially start for you. But when you look at the type of player that he is, I mean, a guy that is a great finisher on the inside. I mean, almost shot 60% this year. Shot 61% a couple of years ago. I mean, he missed last year. I believe he missed it because of injury last year. But a guy that really rebounded this year. Really like the ability to shoot the basketball from the outside. Good catch and shoot guy that can stretch the floor. Love the way that he passes the basketball. Really good for a guy of his size. And then you're talking about a guy that also does a really good job of protecting the rim. All of those things are things that Carolina needs. And this is the guy that I think could balance out a Vin Allen Lubin. And the thing is, if Vin Allen Lubin comes back, and Carolina wants to start him at certain points or wants him to be in the closing lineup at certain points, this is a guy that I think is going to be okay with that. He's just going to come in and play his role. 5 rebounds per game in 20 minutes is pretty solid. You're hoping that if he plays more minutes, it translates to more rebounds. But I really like the way that he goes about his game. He does a really good job. I mean, how he scores. When I was looking at the video for College Basketball Scouting, who does a great job. If you want to see these guys, watch their highlight tapes and see what they do best. That is a great place to do it. The thing is that he is a really good pick and roll, pick and pop type of player. That's where he really shines. And that's something that Carolina does a lot of with their big men. And so I think that could certainly be an area where Carolina looks at him and feels like he fits almost perfectly. So to me, there's an immense amount of pressure because, as you mentioned, they were checking in on Noah Williamson. The reason they were checking in on Noah Williamson is because that was really one of the only big names that's in the portal. The center spot, there are not a lot of big name guys. You had the guy out of South Dakota State that ended up going to Purdue. Carolina never really had any sort of chance there. That's a guy that I feel like entered the portal knowing exactly where he was going. You've got, a couple of other guys who have entered since. I know Efton Reed is a guy that Tar Heel fans are familiar with. Maybe that's a guy that if they do unfortunately miss on Vesser, maybe that's the guy that they end up going after. But I would hope that this is a guy, to me, more athletic, stretches the floor a little bit better. This has to be the top priority because right now there are not a lot of great options there. So it's crucial that Carolina brings the house today. And as you mentioned, they have until 11:59, and then that's it. Then you go into the break for the Final Four. Now, that could help Carolina because this could be the lasting impression. If he really wants to make a make a decision sooner rather than later, it could play into Carolina's favor. But it does kind of limit. They're not able to keep him on campus, through tomorrow and then talk to him in the morning as well. So Carolina's got to lay it all out there today, and hopefully they do, because, man, they get this guy. I think the negative talk around the program, it'll quiet down a little bit. Do I think it's going to be completely gone? No, because there's people that are at this point just looking for reasons to be miserable. But do I think that it would give people a good feeling that at least Carolina's starting to move in the right direction? I certainly think it would.
Yeah, this is a guy that if you watched Arizona play, whether it was in the NCAA tournament, if you're guys like us that watch the sport on a national level just outside of what, the games that Carolina plays in, this is a guy that when he entered the portal and Carolina was, among the schools that were involved with him, you could tell right away would have been a difference maker for Carolina this past season. And his numbers aren't sexy. They're not going to stand out, 9.4 points, 5 rebounds. Those aren't jaw-dropping numbers. But the fact that, it took until the second half of the year to really get consistent production from the 5 spot from Van Allen Lubin. Like, if Carolina had that from November to, all year, Carolina's not where they were in terms of, barely getting into the NCAA tournament. That's my opinion, at least. If they would have had a guy of his caliber that was playing at the 5 spot from the opening game, then I think they win a few games in the non-con that they lost. And I think this season, ultimately, are they still playing this weekend? Probably not. But the season probably isn't viewed as negatively as it is right now. I think you love his ability to just be efficient, scoring at the rim. He has the ability to play, on the perimeter, which, is something that Hubert Davis looks for, is what he desires in his big man. I do think there's a scenario where if you add him to the roster, you could play him and Van Allen Lubin at the same time, which I think is something that Carolina needs to explore. Is getting back to playing with 2 bigs on the court simultaneously. So I do think this is one where, and we've seen Carolina when it feels like they've had their backs against the wall and they've needed to go get a guy. Harrison Ingram is the guy that really comes to mind. They were able to do whatever it took to get him. This feels like one of those guys right now on the surface, because you don't have a big man coming in your incoming freshman class. There isn't just this clear-cut, bona fide stud that's in the portal right now. We still don't know what Zayden High's future at Carolina looks like. So this would be, I think, a nice addition and to a class that needs a big man and to a roster that needs a big man. So hypothetically, there's a lot of positive stuff around Dorn being a Tar Heel when his transfer portal commitment, whenever his transfer portal decision comes to an end. And then you got Vesser on campus today. If you add those 2 guys to a transfer portal class, including Jonathan Powell, how should that be received? Is that Carolina has done enough, Carolina didn't do enough, or would it maybe just be a TBD? We have to wait and see what these guys look like, in the preseason exhibitions that they'll play, let alone the non-conference season.
Yeah, I think you would be pretty satisfied with that. The thing that I would be concerned about is that point guard spot, because do you believe that Nick Dorn is a guy that thrives at that spot, or do you think that he has to move to the 2? If he does, then I think you're having the conversation again about who do you put at point guard. And are you really going to play Seth Trimble there? I know he played it a little bit in high school. He came out as a combo guard, and maybe that's the position where he could thrive the best. I just don't know if he's the passer that you need at point guard. I don't know if that is necessarily his game. I think playing where he did this year is probably the best spot for him to have success. And so to me, it's tough. I would like it on the surface in terms of just the players themselves. the look at the statistics, the watching of the film, you would think, okay, they got some pretty talented guys here. You've got a really good big in Vesser, not the best one that's in the portal. I know the guy, Sean Keat on Facebook puts in, we need the guy out of UAB. That is the best guy in the portal right now. Yatzel Lendenborg is the best guy in the portal right now. Carolina's not going to end up getting him. The amount of money that people are going to spend in the SEC for him, it's going to be outrageous. I don't think Carolina is willing to spend that type of money or simply do not have the type of money to be able to spend on him. We have not heard him be tied to Carolina at all. So I think Vesser is, a really good second option for Carolina there, and I think would give Carolina what they need down low. That would be the headliner. Dorn would be the scorer that, you're hoping can adjust to this level from Elon, have some success, and I think would be someone that everybody would root for because of the family ties to Carolina. I think I think he projects to score the ball at a pretty decent rate because we look at the way that he scored the ball against Carolina, the way that he scored it against Notre Dame. I think he would be fine, and then Powell would be that third piece, which I think is ideally what you want. But to me, I want to know that you're getting a point guard that can handle running that spot and scoring at the level that you need them to. And that's why, to me, I want either Trey Donaldson or Nigel Pack. I think those are the two names that I looked at, and I think to myself, those are guys that can run the point, that can pass the ball the way that they need to, but also can score it at will if they need to. And I think that's where Carolina should be looking. So hopefully they get involved with those two guys. But if they don't, I think you'll feel okay about that group, but I don't think you'll necessarily be pounding your chest because you'll be waiting and hoping that some of the other guys, like in that case, you're hoping that Ian Jackson returns to give you another high volume scorer and that he takes that step this offseason.
Yeah, you mentioned, a Trey Donaldson and Nigel Pack. I mean, Donaldson is 6'2", so he would be bigger than what Elliot Cadeau was, in your backcourt. Nigel Pack, I'm trying to pull up, he's 6 foot. So if you go that route, and I'm very much interested in those two guys. Donaldson was, a difference maker at Auburn, a difference maker, at Michigan. Has experience playing at a high level in a high major conference, but you're still dealing with, I guess, quote unquote, smaller guards, but maybe their experience would overcome what Elliot Cadeau's was, where, as much as Cadeau's height was an issue or lack thereof, I do think some of his inexperience was, exposed this past year with some of the issues that existed on Carolina's roster. So, I think if they get involved with those, if either one of those two guys, I think that's another message that's being sent to you where they're not wanting to make Seth Trimble a point guard. And I know some people have been, somewhat frustrated that Trimble was never developed into being a point guard. But I don't know if that's what his game is best suited to do. I don't know if that's what this roster needs for it to be the best version of itself to begin with. So I do think, though, if Carolina was to, add Dorn and the Arizona big man to the transfer portal cycle, you would at least feel optimistic that you got three guys that will contribute and play a role in what you hope is going to be a turnaround season next year. The unfortunate part is that, like, if Carolina really struggles the rest of the cycle to add to its roster, depending on how many guys come back, it's really going to probably be what makes or breaks Carolina's season next year, unless your incoming freshmen just play out of this world. And I think that's capable for Caleb Wilson. I don't know with Dennis and Dixon if those are guys that are going to be primed to show up right away and be difference makers. Mm-hmm. If they are, that's great. That's fantastic. But if they're not, it could be something that holds that holds Carolina back from achieving what they need to achieve next year. And I think, look, we have not been told by Bubba Cunningham that Hubert Davis is on the hot seat. We're just inferring the situation, knowing what the expectation, what the standard is here. that Hubert Davis is going to have to perform at a high level next year to keep his job. But we don't know what that looks like. Like, as long as is making the tournament, winning a game enough to solidify his job. We don't know. Do you got to do something in the ACC regular season or in the ACC tournament? We don't know. We're just reading the tea leaves and looking at a situation where if he does not win at the rate that we expect to win at, then I think it's at least on the table that Carolina would make a change at its head coaching position. All right, one last thing we got to talk about before we do get out of here. Of course, we told you last night was the McDonald's All-American game. If you tuned in, that's great. You did not see Caleb Wilson have the best of games. He scored 3 points, was 0 of 6 from the field, grabbed 6 rebounds in 20 minutes. All of his points came from the foul line. We've seen guys that come to Carolina show out in the McDonald's All-American game. We've seen guys not show out, but still come to Carolina and be a difference maker. So it's a made-for-TV all-star event. Do not overreact to what he looked like on the court last night. The most important thing is that in practice, he looked the part. And at these types of events, the practices are more important than the games. And so, luckily I did not see too many, negative tweets, comments on the social medias last night. They are going to exist, but, the game is nowhere near as important as the practices are. And in practice, guys like Paul Biancardi that I have a relationship with have raved about him. And so he's going to be a difference maker for Carolina. And knowing the guy that he is and the competitor that he is, he'll probably use that as motivation to when he shows up on campus, not let that be something that gets brought up again, because if there's anyone that's going to be mad about his performance more than him, you're going to be hard pressed to find one. So,
and really quickly, because I watched the game last night, the thing that you like is he was great defensively. I mean, he was everywhere. He was switching between, multiple spots he was able to guard, did a really good job of using his hands, getting active, creating turnovers. That was the thing that shocked me the most about him. Because when you watch him on his film in high school, like every other high school mixtape that they're going to put out there, it's really all about the offensive end of the floor. It's does he have a nice block? He just did a really good job against some of the best offensive players in the country of shutting them down. Did a tremendous job of taking away the dribble drive. Almost no one was able to drive by him the entire night. Rebounding wise, he was solid. The one thing that I do think that he's got to work on the offensive end of the floor, he turned it over a couple of times when he put the ball on the floor and was dribbling and trying to drive to the basket. That's an area that he's got to improve in his game. But here's the thing, the 0 of 6, you're going to have off shooting nights. And I mean, dude, there were guys in this game that took 20 shots by themselves. It's an all-star game, man. These guys are all trying to show out. So they're not running a whole lot of action. There's not a ton of stuff that you can really take away on the offensive end of the floor. It's just, if he would have lit it up, we would have been saying, man, we got a guy that can score with just about anybody in the country. I don't know if that's necessarily his type of game. I think he is going to be able to score the ball when he gets here, but I do think that they're going to have to figure out how exactly to use him. But there's a lot to still like about him. The size really showed up, and like I said, I loved what he did defensively. So that's a really good sign. It's something positive that Carolina fans should take away if they just watched last night.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a fun guy to root for because – for as many times as we've questioned this team's desire, effort, their want to, this kid's got a motor. This kid's going to play. And as I mentioned, man, he's talked a big game. He knows what he's coming into. He knows kind of what's on the line for his head coach. And, he still chose to come here when Hubert Davis was already kind of getting into those murky waters. And so I think he's going to be a guy. I don't want to go the full Harrison Ingram route, but I think he's going to be a guy that we're going to be easy to fall in love with because he's going to play. He can help Carolina in more ways than one, and he'll be the difference maker that Carolina is going to need him to be as a guy that can play multiple positions out there on the perimeter. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. In the meantime, we're going to direct you to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We had you covered with all the news last night around Carolina landing Jonathan Powell, Henry Vesser showing up on Carolina's campus. We'll have you covered throughout the rest of the transfer portal cycle as well. So you want to make sure you're visiting the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com for the latest Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football coverage. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the basketball off season. We're virtually doing an episode a day, it feels like, right about now. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the off season. Well, with that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.